Okay, we're going to start by putting up my Patreon in the chat. It's going to have all the information that's also in the description as well. This one we're going to go on why the idea of bipartisanship is bad because of the fact of what it actually leads to. Because the fact is what bipartisanship really is it's really the act of compromise, and compromise is in politics is very, very bad, because what ends up happening is it ends up being two bags of garbage that end up getting put together, and the American people keep losing on the whole deal because it ends up being 100% of what both sides want, and that's not good in any such matter for liberty. And what ends up happening with that is nothing gets checked out on what we're looking at for what's best for the people. And this is why we don't want compromise in politics. We want none of it. What needs to happen is, such as if we're going to go after a bill, is it needs to be very, very simple with this. We need to have people that are willing to say, okay, we have X amount of people that agree that might be from either party that agree with it, and X amount of people that disagree that might be from both parties. And that's the way things need to come together. And they could be from both parties agreeing with that bill or disagreeing with that bill, but it's coming together because they agree naturally, not because not because you're trying to essentially say, well, we'll add this and this and this and this, and when you start to say, well, we'll add all these things onto it, guess what ends up happening is you end up basically weakening out that original thing, that original bill, and making it a lot worse just to try to appease people, just to pass it. You need to essentially realize what you had in the first place, and it was to appeal to that one little thing to begin with. And that's why we go with bipartisanship being bad, because it's about bipartisanship is about compromise. And what we want is we want something where you have individuals going out there and voting what's best for the Constitution. And what ends up happening here is you have the parties coming together and basically saying, okay, we want this, and then the other party goes, we want this, and they go, okay, we'll work together and we'll slap both things together where both of us get all of this stuff. And what ends up happening in the end is in this case with the United States, the American people get stuck with a huge bill of goods they have to pay for, and it just adds on to the debt, which means we're basically set for more loans. This hampers the United States economy, and it basically means that we're set for a lot of things that we didn't want in the first place. Now, in the other case with it, if we were to do it in another manner, now this means basically just sitting with just doing the budgeting in another manner. Now, this means letting all the budgeting expire, having an honest discussion of what to keep and what not to keep, and which means basically anything that's not controversial gets the boot. Anything that's not controversial stays. And eventually, you're going to realize that it's going to be a very, very small list, and you're going to get rid of a lot of things going from bill to bill. And you can do this within a week if you're willing to work. If you're willing to work 7 days a week, they can basically get this done in 2 weeks. and or actually probably within a week, if they're willing to do a couple a day, and then do the vote on a Sunday, so or do the vote on a Saturday. So Sunday through Friday, they do 2 bills a day. Each house is doing 2 bills a day, doing nothing else. And basically is they'll be debating what stays in each with it, and pretty much they'll be debating on each thing with it and going back and forth on each. And it'll probably take the day of kind of trying to whittle out as much as they can from both houses to get down and make sure it's approved on each of those things, and then they could get probably a vote by the night for each one to approve of it. To get and it would be it would be pretty much a near unanimous vote, because both sides are pretty much getting rid of all of the things. Now, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be kind of mad about it, so they might not vote for it because you've essentially stripped a lot of things out. So they might be kind of mad. But pretty much because you've eliminated a lot of the garbage out of it, and you've done this kind of across the board for both sides, I think this would be the way to go for budgeting. Now, and you would say this is going to go for both sides, and neither side is going to get these extra things they want. And you're cutting out all of this extra garbage that has nothing to do with what the government needs to be paying for. And eventually what you're going to be left with is probably is a government that's going to be about minimum about one third of the cost. Now, what that's going to do is going to allow a lot of money to pay for in the actual discretionary budget. I should state. Now, that's going to allow for a lot of money to be paying out for a lot of the loans, and to buy back a lot of those loans. And what's going to happen is you're going to buy a huge amount of them back, and you're probably going to still have the same tax rate and still continue that until this thing's over. And because you're still going to want to bring in the same amount of money, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be Xing all of that stuff out. And what the occurrence is going to be is that you're going to be essentially eliminating a lot of the debt. And you're going to watch if you watch the debt clock, then it would be eliminating it down. And what this does is then the economy is going to grow at a massive rate. And what you could also do is some things that are beneficial, and this would be going back to the idea of some things that would be in the benefit of both parties. Now, we want less regulation over the economy from people on the right side. Which would be one of the big benefits would be eliminating the limiting central banking. Now, from the left side, they want income equality. Well, the worst possible thing for income equality would be what the central bank has done to essentially cause the massive amount of inflation over the years. And they cause it to where the people at the bottom get hit with the most inflation through their actions. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about; the people at the bottom are always going to be hit with the most inflation, because they think it's going to cause them to spend their money fastest to basically stimulate the economy. And this is why they do this. So if they actually, now in their opinion, if they actually felt a need for for helping out these individuals, they would actually advocate for the very same activity and try to eliminate the central banking. And what they would do then is they would go toward at least go with the idea of an audit, of a full intrusive audit, regardless of what the the Federal Reserve Bank actually started to scream about. And that's what would be assumed. And when we start looking at this is something that needs to be understood. And when it comes to actually policy, you'll notice that policy in the end is going to basically be is going to be a factor of what ends up being the greatest advancement of liberty. And when we start looking at liberty, what the idea of liberty is going to be, it's going to be closer to what the founders had instructed, because the founders uh, wanted these budgets to essentially expire to begin with. They didn't want revolving budgets because uh, if you look at what they didn't want any military budget to last more than 2 years, and which means they're very into the idea of expiration on the budgets, and they wanted this specifically so that budgets could be debated, because otherwise you're not going to have any debate on the floor, any legitimate debate, and it's just going to be about reauthorizing, and that's where you get problems with it. And if you look at early on in the history, you'll see that actually the budgets were allowed to expire, so you actually could have debate on the floor of what's going to be authorized and what's not. And this is crucial because you need that. And otherwise, you're going to just basically just have a situation where both sides are just going to reauthorize and it just becomes what to add on to the budget, and do you want to raise or lower different budgets. And that's the only thing it becomes is raise or lower, and that's not how a budget really works. If you look to an actual situation for a business, they don't just say, okay, we're just going to raise or lower this department's budget. We're not going to actually sit down and actually discuss the actual budget and what's in it, how much they've wasted in their department. We're just going to discuss if we're going to raise or lower their budget, regardless of looking at actual figures of what that actually has gone on. Now we actually have taking for instance, I mean, when we look at Pentagon waste, we know from we know there was in during the 2015 year, we know there was $125 billion in waste. Now, if we look at if we know how much we spent in 2015, that was about 598.5 billion. And if we look at the percentage, that's 20.9 approximately. So just shy of 21%. So if we're talking about 21% of the budget was waste, we could pretty much declare that in any one of these budgets, that about 20 in any one of the military budgets, that about 21% of it's waste. And it could probably be even higher than that right now. And we pretty much know that we can pretty much guarantee that. And this is why we need to have these debates over and these cleared budget debates and clear it all the way out. And this is why they end up wanting to fight this, and why a lot of these things want to fight having their audits, having clean audits for that purpose, because this is when you start to find a lot of this waste. This is the actual whole issue. They'll say, "Oh, but we'll do better next time," and "Oh, it could hurt national security." Well, the fact is we see that they're basically, number one is when they're out in other parts of the world with wars, they're actually, number one is when they have these vehicles, is instead of actually transporting them back to the United States, they're actually destroying the vehicles. Now that's essentially, number one, a massive situation of waste. Now this is part of their policy. Now that's one problem. Uh, so we end up using a lot of things, and we end up destroying a lot of vehicles. Uh, we have our situation with our. I mean, this is just with the Department of Defense. We know that our surveillance drones can be hacked. One of them was actually hacked by Iran, and this was basically them giving us what it called a warning of "don't do it again." And they were able to, what it calls, use it and just fly over open space, just to kind of and take control of it, and not only the camera but actually the vehicle as well. And this was them kind of giving us a warning. Now this should be kind of a key that any that even though they have excellent people for hacking, there's other countries as well with it. So if they were to do this, it means that it's very, very possible that this idea of having these drones is actually a dumb idea, and these unmanned aerial vehicles is no longer being feasible. And this was another vehicle. This was another highly expensive vehicle that we had to explode because of this factor, because they had fears of it being taken over. Well, the fact is, it wasn't going to be taken over. It was just going. They was just going to sit there because they had no interest in it. It was just as a warning shot, because they had already compromised the vehicle, and that means they would have already had some type of knowledge on it without that actual point, if they were able to hack into the system. And that this is why when we get to the idea of these budgets, we need to understand that we have a lot of bloat in our thing with it, and sometimes we need to realize that what we're doing with our actual budgets is, I mean, we see with like the 2020 military budget is about 750 billion. I mean, this is basically uh, it's about three times what it should be. I mean, we're talking, it should be for defense, not military. And if we could easily defend the actual nation and we could easily defend just the nation and its territories for about $250 billion, and have more than enough money to have top quality equipment to do so. It doesn't take that. It doesn't take that kind of money to do so. But what's happening is it would, and this would involve cutting a great deal of waste. But because it would involve exiting NATO, it would involve basically shutting down 100% of our bases overseas and establishing bases here domestically. uh, this is not going to be a very, very popular idea. And this is something that would involve this whole thing of reducing down the debt. And it's something that when we start to look at each one of these bills that would make up a budget, it's something that needs to be understood. And these things are basically, we need to look at things realistically. We can't just keep saying, oh, we're going to pump more money into these things. Well, the fact is if we look at some of these other countries that are spending in money with what we see overall is the amount of expenditures year to year is starting to go down per GDP. And it's actually and we can't be spending a higher amount because that means we're not following the amount of what should be spent. Because if we look at the amount of what should be spent, I mean, per last year we should have spent about 2/3 of what we did, even if we just stayed within GDP, and that would have put us at around 400 some odd $1 billion. That would have been like at least over a $200 billion cut just in military alone, and that would have freaked out the people who want more money at the Pentagon. But as we've said, the Pentagon wastes at least over $100 billion. And what it would mean is that, but if we look at what we only need, it's only about 250 billion, and that means getting out of NATO, getting out of the Middle East, shutting down these 800 plus bases around the globe, and focusing just on the United States alone. And we wouldn't need 800 bases here domestically because that would be like putting so many bases. I mean, they'd be virtually like one per county, and that would just be insane. You do not need that many bases, so we wouldn't even need that many bases around here, which is why we could use far less for numbers of bases. I mean, not like one per county, but like, I mean, it would be like several per state. I mean, sorry about for that error, but it'd be like several per state, and it would that would be kind of overkill. And we know that would not even be functional when it comes down to it, because the fact is uh, it would be more realistic to basically set up, and that's in addition to our current military bases we already have. To establish another 800 would be just completely insane. That would be on average per state. If we were just talking about just the states alone, that would be, we're talking, what about like 13 more per state, 12, 13 more per state? Obviously, larger states would receive more, smaller states would receive less, but the fact is that's a lot. And if we were to do it, that's why we would never need that much. I mean, my state alone with it, if we were to put that up with it, it would basically, we'd have the whole area covered. If we were to just do that average, and it would basically be like we were preparing for like World War III. And that's my current state that I'm living in, Wisconsin. I mean, that would be just insane, even if we were to spread them up properly, and it would be nearly impossible for any country. But if we were to do that, it would be nearly impossible for any country to attack the United States, and that's only if we just do the average. And obviously, there's other states with it that potentially would need like one. I mean, there's states in the Northeast that you put one base in them and that's all they need, because they're so small that's that any more than, you couldn't fit 13 bases without basically saying to all the residents and making it a military state and taking over the whole state. I mean, because the actual size. Now, when we're looking at this, we need to this will essentially, uh, when it comes down to the budget, if we were to let all the funding expire, we're going to actually have more than just getting rid of the waste in this one department. We would actually have a lot of the waste coming out of other departments as well, because there's a lot of money that basically that people feel that is wasteful in other departments. There's going to be people that say, okay, we don't agree with these subsidies for the food because it causes food to go up in price. And so what's going to happen is people that don't live in those subsidy-based states are going to basically vote against it. Now, that means what's going to happen is those subsidies are going to go away. That means what eventually happens is the prices are going to, for those food, go down. Areas that are basically, like, let's say, for instance, sugar. Sugar's basically is only produced in a couple of states in the United States. So basically, if you're not from one of those states, guess what? Those other people are going to say, well, to support the people in my state, I'm not going to validate uh, these subsidies for sugar because it doesn't help out my state. And I'm not going to validate that at all. And what happens is they're going to state, I need to make sure that the people in my state can actually get the cheapest price sugar that they can possibly get. So I want to make sure that no matter what prices they can get the cheapest. And I want to make sure that there are no that they're not blocking sugar from other nations, and that we're not subsidizing things to basically making sure that sugar's more expensive for Americans. And and it's that the in the end with it, I want to make sure that it's cheaper for people to produce for cheaper for people to buy sugar for any of their products. And in the end with it, this is what it would be is you would have people that would vote against it, and and eventually you would see all these subsidies start to go away in the food, because really we don't need it, and you would see some of these specialty loans go away, and some of the regulations from the loans for private areas to give away loans go away as well, because they're going to say, if we're going to do this, we need access to for private people to go away, such as with tobacco. So tobacco could get loans in other sources, and you would eventually see those cases. So it would change around the way that the system goes for the uh, the situation for the loans for the tobacco. So then loans could be given from the banking industry instead, and that they can get their loans naturally for these individual farmers. And government doesn't need to be involved to subsidize those loans in a way that they basically caused it to make it nearly impossible to get loans any other way, because of the regulations and a lot of the things that they've caused in the whole industry. Now, and eventually what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of these little things that are in these budget bills cut out. You're going to see people that are going to say, we don't need the supplemental nutrition assistance program. We can eliminate that completely because we have local charities that give out free food. We can essentially rely on them for this free food that they give out, and we can use them as an alternative for the instead of the government doing this. And it can allow them, because these groups actually provide healthy food instead of the garbage food alternatives that ends up usually being bought by the food under SNAP. because SNAP usually ends up getting bought for stuff like uh, cheese puffs and pies and all this other garbage food. So when you have to when you buy snack food that's under that's from the when you get snack food from these charities, it's usually like healthy things like multigrain chips and things like that, and then you'll get fruit and different things like that. So you end up finding in that those solutions. And as we know, with SNAP, it's only meant to supplement your food as well. It's not meant to take care of your whole food amount. Now, when you look at but they would actually have much of these things that they can actually give to people. And when it comes down to that, they can actually replace a lot of what goes under those, and that those charities could essentially step in and be empowered by the government and stop where the government is essentially taking people's money, where people can donate to the charities further than what they currently do because of where the government's taking a lot of people's tax money, and eventually you can start reducing that down. And eventually you're going to get to the point to where we can reduce this debt down, and it's going to cause more economic growth. And and you have a lot of the cases where these things for the food are in every community. So there is no excuse for saying, "Oh, but it's not in my community." Well, that's actually a lie. It's in all these communities. The only basically is in a lot of cases with it, these are being a lot of the food are being supplied naturally from a lot of the grocery stores as well. That are being given. It might be closer to the expiration dates as well for the chips and stuff. But beyond that, they usually a lot of times just donate in the fruit with it. That ends up being just ones that came in that was in too much excess, but it's still 100% fresh. But it just came in too much of excess. So what they do is they donate it in, and they'll write it off on their taxes, and it ends up being a benefit for both sides. And this is something that's beneficial for everyone instead of the government being involved. And we can actually see that this is something that where you can get a local solution, where they can get something that's actually healthy for them, that'll actually start to combat some of these problems of obesity, which is goes to combating some of these health problems that we're seeing with some people as well. And most of what they're doing on a federal level is really they're just basically creating more problems than there actually needs to exist. And if they really look at what they're doing, they're actually stacking upon more problems. And that's why when we talk about this, that's why this is basically the issue of this. That's why bipartisanship really is bad, because they end up coming together. They end up saying, "Hey, I get this really bad idea," and they go, "Well, I got this really bad idea," and they go, "Let's put them together," instead of saying, "Okay, these are two bad ideas. Let's throw them in the garbage, and let's come up with an actual real solution." And basically, this that's why compromise is bad, because you end up compromising and tossing things together which are bad, instead of people coming together with things that they agree on in the first place. Now, agreement from opposing parties is completely different than bipartisanship. Bipartisanship is that's where you get compromise, and the compromise is bad. When you get agreement on policy to begin with, that's perfectly fine. You're going to find that in many different cases, and that's perfectly fine if they want to do that. But the fact is that doesn't happen often, and that's supposed to not happen often. And they go, oh, but that stalls the way government works. Well, it's supposed to stall the way government works. That's because you're not supposed to keep adding on new laws every single minute. And the fact is, you're not supposed to keep adding on spending. That's why historically, when we've actually let a lot of these budgets expire in the past, why there hasn't been a lot of things added on, and why it was actually staying pretty low, and why we weren't adding on a huge amount of debt. If you go previous to the progressive era, you would notice that our amount of debt that we incurred was actually minimal at best. But since the progressive era, we've actually added on a massive amount of debt. And that's the whole problem. And the progressive era really changed the way government actually worked by they started out with trying to doing things like stacking the courts to make sure that they could get these things through, and come up with the ideas of this compromise and with the people, and trying to change around all these things, and it really changed around the way government actually should be working, and it turned out to be a very bad idea. That's why we end up being in the mess that we are today. You can't do that. You have to make sure you stick to your actual guns. And we want people sticking to their actual guns on these things. When they've gotten weak, that's why we've gotten into all this mess. The problem is people say, oh, we don't have enough bipartisanship. The problem is that's not the problem today with it. We have too much bipartisanship today. That's why we have all this debt today that we have going. That's why we have all these bad policies today. That's what caused all of it. If you want to get rid of it, and if you want to stop all this garbage, you need to get rid of the bipartisanship. You need people to actually disagree naturally on policy and let that kind of go through. And what's going to happen with it is you're going to say, oh, but then a lot of these things are going to sunlight. Well, yeah, and a lot of these things, and if you let a lot of the spending expire and only reauthorize the stuff that's not controversial, then there's going to be a lot of things that pop off the budget. You are right. That's what's going to happen. And we're not going. And then we're not going to defend Israel, and we're not going to defend the Middle East, and we're not going to be the world's policeman. You're right. Oh, we're not going to give money to Planned Parenthood. You're right. That's kind of the point. If you look at historically with it, we didn't do this. We weren't. It wasn't the government's job to be charity. That was what. If you wanted to donate to a charity, you did it on your own. We weren't engaged in entangling alliances. This is basically when you go back to Thomas Jefferson, he stated himself. When you go back to George Washington stated he did not want to be involved in the political affairs of Europe. He stated himself as well. And these are two of the founders of the nation. And I'm sorry, but we need to start going back to that and understand that. It doesn't matter if we say, oh, but it's different now. It's not different now. It's the same country. It's the same ideas, and we need to understand it's the same thing. And now, if you like it, subscribe, click the notification bell. Make sure you share it all around social media, and share it with your friends. Check out my Patreon page, and make sure that you if you can't donate, make sure to share it with someone else who can. And that's about it. I will give a podcast today. Not sure what it's going to be about yet, but I will do a podcast, and I will also do a what do you call it? Do the night live stream as well. That's about it, and see you guys later.